Sure. Yes.
On site.
Fabulous. So, first off, thank you so much to Lori for having me and my colleagues here today. If I could do some quick introductions. I'm joined today by Natalie Smith, who works at the Frontera Strategy from Austin. Jen Esterline, who's working with me on the Philanthropy Engagement Project, also from Austin. She is the founder of the Texas Education Grantmakers Advocacy Consortium, which now has 35 Texas foundations jointly funding research and advocacy projects. As far as we know, it's the largest policy collaborative of its kind, maybe on anything, but definitely on public education, probably in the country. Additionally today, we are joined by Ms. Helene Stebbins from the Alliance for Early Success, who I'm about to talk about in 1 second. A large kind of akin to what we're talking about today that's happening in Texas and now in New Mexico. Michael Weinberg, he's our Exhibit A. So he's the guy who has, over the course of the last 6 weeks, been working with New Mexico foundations. And in the New Mexico legislative session that just ended last week, they were able, as part of an effort, it wasn't all of them, we never take 100% credit for these things, but they were able to secure through their work, an additional $900,000 in the next year in the New Mexico state budget for home visiting programs to serve high-quality families, to serve high-quality home visiting services to serve families. This on your table is an op-ed that was written and ran in the Albuquerque Journal a couple of weeks, February 4th, written by Michael's boss and the benefactor of the Thornburg Foundation, Garrett Thornburg. So that's who's with me, and what we're going to talk about is, as Sam just said, the many oars in the room. Raise your hand if you work for a private foundation. Raise your hand if you work for a family foundation, which may or may not be a private foundation. Raise your hand if you work for a community foundation. Raise your hand if you work for an organization that would love to buy torches and pitchforks for advocates. So out there, some of these foundations, they do exist. Raise your hand if you work for a foundation that is terrified by the idea of engaging the Arizona legislature, or has never done it, or is just a little bit uneasy about it. That's most of the room. Now, what we are here to do today is to say, where did Michael step out again? His legislature is just wrapped up. Michael did this the last 6 weeks, and as you saw, he's alive. He's not in jail, and he has just gotten a big kudos from his boss for everything that's happened, all right? So, the conversation we're going to have today, kind of building upon what Sam just said about the legality of what you can do, let's have a conversation. I was just talking smack about you. The word heroic was used for the record. What we're going to talk about today is moving beyond the what you can do to have a conversation about what you should be doing. How do you know what the law says you're able to do? How do you do it in a way that's safe, that's effective, and will ensure that people of influence in Arizona are not angry with you, but are absolutely thrilled that you are engaged. I knew that we were onto something several years ago when I walked with a guy who had flown 150 combat missions over Vietnam, went on to become engineering entrepreneur, now multi-millionaire. I go over to the legislature with him. His hands are shaking when he's meeting with a 24-year-old staffer. This guy flew 150 missions over Vietnam, and he's terrified of it. He made millions of dollars in private sector business, and he's terrified of the 24-year-old staffer. Okay, so that's the reality in which we're working. Those are our people. And the question became, for him, he realized the influence that he had when that 24-year-old staffer's boss came out to meet him because he was the foundation member. And then when we talked about the research that he had funded an organization to do per Sam's recommendation, and the chair of the Senate Finance Committee hugged his report. So all of a sudden, he went from fearing the unknown and the potential backlash associated with getting involved with public policy to being in a room, terrified, but leaving with his work being hugged by one of the most powerful women in Texas political history. Okay? That's the opportunity here. Last session, Jen brings 150 foundation people back to the Capitol the third consecutive legislative session. You know what we did this year? Previous sessions, we had our people walk around door to door, going all over the Capitol. We weren't doing that this session because you know what? Your foundations, you're the backbone of Arizona. You don't go to the legislature. The legislature comes to you. So we got a room off of the Senate chambers, and we put 25 foundations in it, and we gave all the members that we wanted to come talk a half an hour audience with us, not the other way around. And you know what? The Speaker of the House, whose cousin is a member of the New Mexico Early Childhood Funders Group, but our Speaker of the House was 15 years old. That's the power you guys have. That's not being actualized in Arizona or in most other states. And if we think about what we can accomplish, who we can be, if we open our minds and work together, so much can happen. Now, in the very brief amount of time that I have today, I really want to talk specifically about, okay, who are you and why are you here? Talk about the Alliance for Early Success, Helene's group. Talk about the Philanthropy Engagement Project, the work that we're doing to replicate some of the successes we've seen in Texas and other states. And then we'll talk about the 5 steps to advocacy success that our foundations in Texas and now in New Mexico, and hopefully we can do this in Arizona and other places, how we did this, how we constructed the effort, how we brought the people together, and how we went from a moment of crisis. The Texas work was formed in the midst of $5.4 billion in budget cuts just to public schools in 2011. That, forged in crisis, but now very much engaged in opportunity. Okay, that's the conversation we want to have today. And then finally, we have Exhibit A, Michael Weinberg from the Thornburg Foundation next door in New Mexico. This is kind of like the Lewis and Clark expedition work that we're doing. We're kind of proceeding toward the Pacific as we go. Presumably California's next after we work with you all in Arizona. So that's what we're talking about today. So a very quick overview, and as I said, Helene is here at the outset. The Alliance for Early Success is a collaboration, for lack of a better word, of some of the largest private grant-making institutions in the history of the planet, just to be blunt. And they have collectively decided that if we're going to move the needle on children's issues, particularly children's issues related, starting at birth and continuing through age 8, where we all know both public and private dollars get their biggest return on their investment. If we're going to engage in this work, moving policies at the state level, let's do it together, because as the Alliance always hammers home, we are stronger and better together. And if if the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, let's just put it all on out there. If the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the largest grant maker in the history of the planet, feels like they need to collaborate to be more powerful and get stuff done, I think the rest of us can take that as an indicator that we too may need to join with our partners, because together we are stronger and better. That's the approach that the Alliance is taking in their work with these national funders. They were intrigued by what was happening in Texas and came to us, and Jen and myself, and said, all right, you guys have created a really interesting model here where you're engaging private foundations, you're engaging community foundations, and we're doing it in such a way where, I was at the outset, I said, who's a private foundation, who's a community foundation, who has a really reticent board, who is, Sarah is the lucky one with a really aggressive board. And then the reality, so normally, that's where the conversation stops. Well, we can't do policy. Our community foundation regulations are different than private foundations. Our benefactors would never, ever get involved in that advocacy stuff. Or just for whatever reason, and there are millions of them, there are a myriad of reasons for you not to work together. Everything is theoretically against you. However, if we think about the way that Sam laid this out, the fact that different kinds of institutions, different kinds of foundations can do different things. You talked about how the private foundations cannot directly fund lobbying. Community foundations can directly fund lobbying. So what if we create a big enough tent where everyone's perspective and everyone's legal framework has a place? So that instead of our differences preventing us from working collectively stronger and better together, for the last slide, they bring us together, and they're not obstacles, they are opportunities. Because your legislature is not monolithic. Your legislature doesn't come in with one distinct set of opinions and ideas. They come in with the diverse myriad of opinions and ideas that are represented. I'm not pretentious, dude. Come on, I got it. But the reality of it is that you all represent Arizona like your legislature represents Arizona. The diversity of opinion, the diversity of ideas. Now, the goal of the Philanthropy Engagement Project that the Alliance has asked us to kind of really roll out experimentally around the country. And you'll hear about what's happened in New Mexico, and we're talking to folks in New York about doing this as well. But our goals are really, really clear in all of this. The reality is, if we're going to move the needle for young children in this country, it's gonna happen in state capitals. Because how many bills, Sam, do you know how many bills that Congress passed last year? 500?
Well, there were a lot of post offices.
Lots of, 500 post offices, and but state legislatures passed 30,000 odd bills last year. The action is at the state capitals, and that's what the Alliance is asking people to put their resources into, and doing so collectively together. And the Alliance has worked with 200 of the best researchers in the United States, probably the world in some of them, to figure out what those policy levers are. And they've got a template for us that we're using with our partners. So the goals of our project are really simple: to increase the number of foundations total who are willing to get into the advocacy pool, willing to jointly or solo, but ideally jointly, fund with partners specific, very focused legislative goals without lobbying. No lobbying required here. Number two, increase the amount of foundation money that's invested in advocacy. Not just the number of foundations who are doing it, but the aggregate number of dollars. And the third point that Sam was touching on at the end of this presentation that has been one of the most powerful things that we've done is mobilizing trustees. Your trustees, if you get your trustees to go to the legislature, that's not a lobbying expense. They're volunteers, right? Using your volunteers as lobbyists, if you pay for your trustees a bus token to go down to the Capitol, you might have to like that. But the reality is your trustees have a voice that is legitimate, that is profound, that is influential, and that will be recognized and will be heard by legislators. This, is one of the things that we really want to beat home to everybody, is that there are a lot of foundations in this room. Some of this is the torch and the pitchfork store is over here, right? Some of your foundations are going to fund torches and pitchforks, so that people will go to the Capitol and be rabble rousers, right? Some of your foundations would never in a million years touch that, right? Never in a million years. But they will fund research. And what we've been able to do in Texas and what we're working to do in New Mexico is to make sure that the foundations, the most reticent private foundations, let them fund the research, right? The less reticent private foundations, the community foundations, let them fund the advocates. The most, brazen, let's do it, let's go there, foundations, let them mobilize their trustees. So when I asked at the outset, whose foundations are gung-ho on this and whose aren't, it's not because I was saying, okay, now I know who I can ignore. It was because I was like, look, there's no wrong place for you on here. There's only your place on the continuum for your individual board of trustees, for your individual donor intent, for your individual foundation's reason for being. And the beauty of what we've been able to accomplish, in my mind, is that we found a place for everyone. If your foundation doesn't want to fund research, doesn't want to fund advocacy, but is cool with research, what happens to most of the research that foundations fund? Do people read it? Or does it get trapped in a 3-ring binder prison? Most of my experience, we see the 3-ring binder prison all too often. So let's figure out a way where those folks don't have their work and their investment trapped in a 3-ring binder, but instead put it in the hands of other advocates who are being funded by other foundations whose boards of directors are more hip on the idea of advocacy, and then put that research in the hands, this is when it gets really wild, put it in the hands of trustees who will sit in a room and meet with half-hour cycles of legislators who come and talk to them and say, you know what, we commissioned somebody to do this research, and we'll talk about how that happens in a second, and this is what we think. So it's direct trustee engagement, and the idea of every single foundation has a place. The people who are over here are not better at doing advocacy than the people over here. They're just doing a different part of the whole. Think of this as a stool. Without the research, without the advocacy, without the engagement, you're not going to get anything done. Without either one of those three, your stool's going to fall over. If you have the stool, the three-legged stool, it can hold the weight of your policy requests. So, how we've been able to do this in Texas has been very almost formulaic in doing it. It's a 5-step process that we've used in Texas. We're beginning to roll it out in in New Mexico, but they were a little bit farther ahead in their thinking already for some of it. But this is how we do all of our work. All of my clients that we work in about 10 states now, multiple nonprofit lobby clients. Every state legislature I've worked in, this general way of thinking will frame what you're trying to accomplish in a manner that makes it palatable to everybody. First, focus. This is the single hardest thing. If you're going to get engaged in legislative work and policy, you have to confront the fact that you can't do everything for everyone all the time. And that unfortunately, and it's so painful, especially when there's so much need, you have to focus. You have to distill, you have to be specific. Secondly, you have to have politically powerful data. All data is not the same, right? My friend Jen Escherline is a graduate of the Lyndon Baines Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin, one of the best public policy schools in the country. About 250 miles from Austin is the George H.W. Bush School for Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University. When we hire researchers with foundation dollars in partnership with foundations, when those foundations are reviewing the applications, whose message, whose data is going to be more politically powerful at the Texas Capitol? The Bush School or the LBJ School? Let's have an honest political conversation here. It's the Goldwater Institute, people. Would you go to the Goldwater Institute to get your research done? Is that going to be more believable? Or is it going to be more believable if it's coming from a more progressive voice in a place like the Arizona legislature? What we have been very, very, very careful about doing is ensuring that the messengers, that the data that we're giving to our messengers is coming from a source that will be believed. The numbers could be exactly the same, but they'll be different, right? 2.5 does not equal 2.5 if it's at the Texas legislature, or the Arizona legislature, or the New Mexico legislature, if it's coming from a voice that's not believed, period. You might as well not do the research if you're having somebody who's not credible politically do it for you. Secondly, recruit unexpected messengers. The number one most important messengers are your own boards of trustees, number one. They're completely unexpected. When a foundation representative goes to the legislature, legislators are very accustomed to people coming to them making this gesture. That's what 95% of the legislative meetings are about. Give me, give me, give me. Give me more money, give me an appropriation, give me a bill that allows me to get more money. Money, money, money. It's all about money, right? That's why we have a political system, to regulate commerce around us in a lot of ways, right? The reality that we've been able to confront, though, is when you focus and you get good, powerful data from a good, powerful source, and then you put it in the hands of people that they're not accustomed to hearing from on those issues, it can be mighty powerful. This last legislative session, we were working on pre-K in Texas, and we were able to have we had retired admirals coming to testify for pre-K. We had police chiefs coming to testify for pre-K. We had we had pastors for Texas Children, which is evangelical ministers for pre-K. They came in very useful when the Lieutenant Governor's Tea Party Advisory Board labeled the Republican governor's pre-K bill godless and socialistic. Who better to respond to that than our partners at Pastors for Texas Children? Okay? If you know where your conversation is going, you can build firewalls in before your conversation even starts politically. Having those unexpected messengers talking about your issues makes all of the difference, and we cannot forget the single most powerful unexpected messengers for whom you have free access that will not count as a reportable lobbying expense are your own boards of trustees. They're powerful people on foundation boards. What you see when you take a foundation representative into a legislative office is a very profound change in the conversation. It goes from being, here's my cup, please fill it, to the foundation people going in and saying, look, we don't need your tin cup. We've got a truckload of silver cups back home. I mean, we're not here to ask you for anything. We're here to be a peer. We're here to say that we, like you, get constant demands on our resources. We, like you, have to make hard choices about how we spend our money. We, like you, are confronted every day with people who want more and more and more from us. You're not a peer. I'm sorry, you're not a supplicant going to these legislative offices. You're a peer. And when we transform how the legislature thinks about philanthropists from piggy bank to partner, then we can begin to move an agenda where foundations and legislators work together, because they recognize that while they're making cuts, your dollars are not limitless, although they might think that they are. Now, maximizing political and media opportunities. For example, this editorial right here, we didn't write this at like a random time. We dropped this in the second week of a 4-week-long budget session in Santa Fe. We timed it pretty well, really, as part of the conversation. Take advantage of those opportunities to make sure that you have the chance to really get your issues out there in a new and different way. And finally, this is where a lot of organizations, foundations in particular, don't plan. People always assume, it's like the Robert Redford movie, The Candidate. What's the last line in the movie? Does anybody remember?
What do we do now?
Yeah.
What do we do now? I mean, that's what happens with so many foundations and nonprofits who get something passed. They don't actually, they're like, hooray, we're done! No, this is the very, very, very beginning of the beginning. Now you actually have to make sure it gets implemented well, or you will have zero credibility the next time you want to come back and get something done in this building. Now,